Who aren't Obama, who aren't Reagan, who aren't Bill Clinton.
Absolutely. I think Mike Bloomberg wakes up this morning knowing exactly what a Wells Fargo CEO feels like at a banking committee hearing with Elizabeth Warren. But Donnie's point, I think, is really important, and that is that there wasn't just that technical pivot, that just idea of answer the question but get to something bigger, go to somewhere different, talk about something that helps broaden your record and explain part of your history and your value system and things like that. He just seemed to, and I think it was partly Elizabeth Warren and others kind of putting him on the defensive in the sense that he just really couldn't get off of it. And I think they've got a lot of work to do before the next debate in a week. They may not want to qualify for the next debate. But, there are very few of these moments left before Super Tuesday. This was one of the two debates left. There are just not that many big moments to leave that first impression because less than 2 weeks from today, a third of the delegates will have already been chosen, right? This process happens so quickly. We get lulled into thinking we're going to the state fair, and we've got this in Iowa, this in New Hampshire, and then bam, March happens and 70% of the delegates will be picked. So you've got to get this on track really quickly, and you've got to get those answers much sharper.
Yeah, and California happens where Bernie Sanders has a huge lead, and there's a big pot of delegates waiting for him.
And really, I thought the answer last night, the question that Chuck asked at the end about the plurality, would you support or should the nominee be just the one who gets a plurality of delegates? Bernie Sanders says yes, 5 others say no, and it seems to me like 6 candidates know where this race is headed, right. And that is unless or until they do something about Bernie Sanders, he's going to amass that. And you could see last night Pete trying to kind of say Bloomberg and Bernie, while many of them were very much focused on Bloomberg, who's in the middle of that kind of moderate muddle lane. And boy, if they don't watch out, they'll look up, as you said, after California, Texas, and Super Tuesday and realize it's impossible to catch them.
Interesting to note, too, 4 years ago, Bernie Sanders made the exact opposite argument about delegates going into the convention. Let's talk about this debate within the Democratic Party between capitalism and socialism. It's a live question, including inside a presidential debate, whether capitalism is good in America. Here is Mike Bloomberg and Senator Bernie Sanders.
We have a grotesque and immoral distribution of wealth and income. Mike Bloomberg owns more wealth than the bottom 125 million Americans. That's wrong. That's immoral. That should not be the case when we got 500,000 people sleeping out on the streets, when we have kids who cannot afford to go to college, when we have 45 million people dealing with student debt.
Mayor Bloomberg, should you exist?
I can't speak for all billionaires. All I know is I've been very lucky, made a lot of money, and I'm giving it all away to make this country better. And a good chunk of it goes to the Democratic Party as well.
Is it too much? Have you earned too much money? Has it been an obscene amount of money? Should you have earned that much money?
Yes. I worked very hard for it, and I'm giving it away.
Senator Sanders has a proposal that would require all large companies to turn over up to 20% of their ownership to employees over time. Is that a good idea?
I think that employee ownership of companies is a great idea. I'm not sure it makes sense to command those companies to do it. If we really want to deliver less inequality in this country, then we got to start with the tax code. And we got to start with investments in how people are able to live the American dream, which is in serious decline.
And I'm very proud of that policy. All right. What we need to do to deal with this grotesque level of income and wealth inequality is make sure that those people who are working, you know what, Mr. Bloomberg, wasn't you who made all that money. Maybe your workers played some role in that as well.
Bloomberg, you own a large company. Would you support what Senator Sanders is proposing?
Absolutely not. I can't think of a ways that would make it easier for Donald Trump to get reelected than listening to this conversation. It's ridiculous. We're not going to throw out capitalism. We tried that. Other countries tried that. It was called communism, and it just didn't work.
Let's talk about democratic socialism, not communism, Mr. Bloomberg. That's a cheap shot. Let's talk about democratic. Let's talk about what goes on in countries like Denmark, where Pete correctly pointed out they have a much higher quality of life in many respects than we do. What are we talking about? We are living in many ways in a socialist society right now. Problem is, as Dr. Martin Luther King reminded us, we have socialism for the very rich, rugged individualism for the poor.
What a wonderful country we have. The best-known socialist in the country happens to be a millionaire with 3 houses. What did I miss here?
Well, you'll miss that I work in Washington, House 1.
That's the first problem.
Live in Burlington, House 2.
That's good.
And like thousands of other Vermonters, I do have a summer camp. Forgive me for that. Where is your home? Which tax haven do you have your home?
New York City, thank you very much.
Yeah,
and I pay all my taxes. And I'm happy to do it because I get something for it.
So, Joe, that was the second hour of the debate where Mayor Bloomberg settled in a little bit and did better.
Wow, I'm uncomfortable.
But Chuck Todd enters the Debate Question Hall of Fame asking Mayor Bloomberg, should you exist? A literal existential question.
Yeah, no, that was something. And, Robert, it is interesting that, and maybe he just had to sort of shake off the cobwebs. He hasn't done this in a decade. Yeah. It is interesting, about 70 minutes in, even tough critics of Bloomberg were commenting, his climate change answer was actually very good. He does know data. He does know facts as well as anybody on that stage on a lot of the policy issues of our time. And that was an exchange, again, that should have been one of his weaker points, being a guy that's worth over $50 billion, and yet he handled the money question well, and the water sort of calmed for him in the second and third hour.
Well, and really from a technical standpoint, you can see the beginning of that answer isn't so great because you're afforded, I think, 1 minute and 15 seconds for these answers last night. He probably used 10 seconds of it when he started talking. I've made a lot of money and I'm giving a lot of it away. You mentioned the climate change answer. A lot of that money is going to things through the philanthropy like climate change, expanding on that answer. And then he got into the obvious, the back and forth in a little bit better way. You could tell, as we've all talked about, he got comfortable, and I think he probably just got tired of just absorbing everything that was coming at him and really being the only one that was absorbing really major hits last night. He finally pivoted. He finally punched back a little bit. I thought the line against Bernie was a pretty good one.
Yeah. Let's bring in NBC News political reporter Shaquille Brewster. He's covering the Sanders campaign. How do they feel about last night?
Oh, they feel really good about last night, especially the money that they brought in the day of the debate, the best debate day fundraising that they've seen. $2.7 million that was raised on debate day. That's just under what we saw from Senator Elizabeth Warren. They got 150,000 contributions on debate day alone. So they feel good about what they saw. And let's not forget, this wasn't an easy debate necessarily for Senator Sanders. He received a little bit more scrutiny than we've seen him receive in the past. You saw that extended conversation about democratic socialism. We haven't really had him defend that policy, that ideology in the past before. He was confronted about not releasing his full medical records, for example. He has only released letters from doctors, and he was confronted by Vice President Biden and Mayor Pete Buttigieg for saying he's not transparent in doing that. He promised before, after his heart attack, that he would release those medical records. He also was confronted about the online supporters that he has, the so-called Bernie bros. He had to defend that and disavow some of that support and some of the rhetoric that we've seen online from some of his supporters and connected it to the toxic online culture that you already have out there. So he had to defend a lot, and his campaign feels like he held his own on that. I'll tell you, they're also happy that Mayor Bloomberg was on that stage. Mayor Bloomberg is a much more natural foil for Senator Sanders, and you got a little hint of that last night. When Senator Sanders goes after the billionaire class, he was able to point at Mayor Bloomberg and say, hey, you own more wealth than, I believe the number was 125 million Americans. That's something that personalized that line, and he was able to point and make that direct reference and have that direct confrontation. His team was happy he was able to do that. They were preparing and they were expecting the attacks that he was going to get. He's been rising in the polls. They knew that the target would be on his back, but they were happy that he was able to take the fight to Mayor Bloomberg as well. Mika?
NBC Shaquille Brewster, thank you so much for that.
Listen, Bernie,
wow.
we talked about the slugfest between Elizabeth Warren and Bloomberg, Amy and Pete, which we'll show you coming up.
We've got lots to show.
Tell you what, such uncomfortable moments there. But as far as, while we keep this whole boxing metaphor going forward, you know what? Bernie was just the best fighter on the stage last night. If you believe what he believes, or if you can be influenced by what he believes, by his ideology, he had a lot of facts that supported his cause. He knew how to deliver them. I mean, he was the most natural political athlete on the stage last night. And it showed. And again, while everybody was piling up on Bloomberg, Bernie was just sitting there thinking, let's see, in 2 weeks, I might be locking this thing down.
Yeah. Worst thing to happen to the Bloomberg campaign, qualifying for the debate. Still ahead on Morning Joe, Senator Amy Klobuchar joins us on the heels of last night's huge debate. She and Pete Buttigieg tangled a number of times, including a really tough exchange over her stance on immigration and her time in Congress.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.